The rain pelted against my face as I clutched Jamie tighter to my chest, his tiny body wrapped in the only waterproof jacket I owned. My thin cotton shirt was soaked through, clinging to my skin like a desperate lover, but I didn't care. All that mattered was keeping him dry, keeping him safe. The midnight streets of Boston looked different in the downpour, angrier, more hostile, as if the city itself was punishing me for what I'd done. "Shh, baby," I whispered, as Jamie stirred against me, his chubby fists balling up the fabric of my shirt. "Mommy's got you. We're going to be okay. But would we?" The question haunted me as I ducked into the bus station, water dripping from my hair onto the cracked linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a sickly glow. A couple of late-night travelers dozed on plastic chairs. An old man with weathered hands clutched a paper cup like it contained liquid gold. No one looked at me. A young woman with a baby at 2 a.m. was just another sad story in a city full of them. I approached the ticket counter, counting out the crumpled bills I'd saved over months of double shifts at the diner. My fingers trembled as I pushed them toward the bored-looking attendant. "One way to Portland, please," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "For me and my son. My son." The words still felt new on my tongue, strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. 6 months ago, Jamie had been nothing but a prayer and a promise. Now he was real, perfect, with Antonio's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. The thought of Antonio made my stomach clench, a familiar panic rising in my throat. "That'll be $78.50, the attendant said, barely looking up from his computer. "Bus leaves in 40 minutes, platform 3. I handed over the money, painfully aware that it left me with exactly $143.27 to start a new life. The ticket felt flimsy in my hand, a paper bridge to a future I couldn't see clearly, but one where Jamie would be safe, where we would both be free. I found a seat in the corner of the waiting area, as far from the entrance as possible, and finally allowed myself to breathe. Jamie had fallen asleep against my chest, his soft snores a rhythm that kept me grounded. I kissed the top of his head, inhaling his baby scent, powder and innocence and possibility. "We're going to start over," I whispered to him. "Somewhere he'll never find us." My phone vibrated in my pocket, the cheap burner I'd bought 3 days ago, after leaving my real one behind at the apartment. No one had this number. No one except Sophia. My heart rate doubled as I fumbled to answer it. "Ava? Are you okay? Where are you?" Her voice came through in a panicked whisper. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "We're both fine. I can't tell you where. He knows." The 2 words fell like stones, heavy and final. "Antonio knows you're gone. He came to the restaurant looking for you." "Eva, I've never seen him like this." Ice spread through my veins. I'd calculated everything so carefully, waiting until Antonio was away on business for the weekend, taking only what we absolutely needed, leaving no trail. 3 days. I'd thought we'd have at least 3 days before he noticed. "What did he say?" I forced myself to ask, though I already knew the answer. Sophia hesitated, and in that pause, I heard everything she wasn't saying. He said to tell you that running is pointless, that you and the baby are his, and he'll find you no matter where you go. Her voice cracked. "Eva, what did you do? What did you take from him?" "Nothing." The word came out too loud, causing Jamie to stir against me. I lowered my voice. "Nothing except what's mine. Jamie is mine." "You know that's not how Antonio sees it," Sophia said softly. "Eva, I'm scared for you. You know what he's capable of." Yes, I knew. Better than anyone. I'd seen the casual cruelty, the calculated violence. I'd bandaged his knuckles without asking questions. I'd looked away when men came to our apartment late at night, speaking in hushed tones about shipments and territories. I'd pretended not to understand what it meant when Antonio said he took care of a problem. For 2 years, I'd told myself I was in love with his intensity, his power, the way he made me feel protected. But when I held Jamie in my arms for the first time, I finally understood the difference between protection and possession. "I have to go," I said to Sophia. "Thank you for everything. Don't call this number again, okay? And if he asks..." I haven't heard from you, she finished. Be safe, Eva. For both your sakes. The line went dead, and with it, my last connection to my old life. I stared at the phone for a long moment before removing the battery and dropping both pieces into separate trash cans. I didn't cry. Crying wouldn't help Jamie. Instead, I held him closer and watched the clock, counting down the minutes until our bus would take us away from this city, away from Antonio Castellanos and the empire he'd built on blood and fear. 20 minutes later, I was standing on platform 3, a small duffel bag at my feet containing everything we owned in the world. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy mist that blurred the edges of everything. Jamie was awake now, his dark eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with quiet curiosity. That's right, sweetheart, I murmured, bouncing him gently. We're going on an adventure. I was so focused on Jamie that I didn't notice the black SUV pulling up outside the station until the doors opened. I didn't register the significance of the 3 men in dark suits entering the building until they spread out, their eyes scanning the waiting area with methodical precision. My blood turned to ice. I knew those men. I knew who they were looking for. I turned away quickly, hunching my shoulders, using Jamie's tiny body as a shield. My mind raced. The bathroom? No, I'd be trapped. The exit on the other side? Too far, too exposed. The bus. It had to be the bus. If I could just get on board, if we could just leave. I risked a glance over my shoulder. One of the men, Marco, Antonio's most loyal enforcer, was showing my photograph to the ticket attendant, who was nodding and pointing toward the platforms. My heart hammered against my ribs as I moved toward the waiting bus, trying to appear calm while every instinct screamed at me to run. 10 steps away. 5. I could see the driver inside, checking something on his clipboard. Miss? Excuse me, miss, the voice came from behind me, authoritative and familiar. I kept walking, my arms tightening around Jamie. Eva Reyes. My name. My real name. Not the alias I'd used to buy the ticket. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. A hand gripped my shoulder, turning me around with surprising gentleness. Marco's face came into view, the face I'd seen countless times at Antonio's side, at our dinner table, even at the hospital the day Jamie was born. Ava, he said, his voice softer now. Mr. Castellanos would like to speak with you. He held out a phone, not just any phone, but a sleek black device I recognized immediately as Antonio's personal line, the one he used only for family and his innermost circle. Please, Marco added, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Was it pity? Jamie began to fuss, perhaps sensing my distress. I bounced him automatically, a mother's instinct overriding fear. I don't want to talk to him, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Marco's expression didn't change. He said you would say that. He also said to tell you that if you don't take this call, he will personally come to find you, and Mr. Castellanos is not in a state to be reasonable right now. The threat hung in the air between us, made more terrifying by its understatement. I knew Antonio's rage. I'd witnessed it directed at others, never at me, but the possibility of it turned now on Jamie and me was unthinkable. With a trembling hand, I took the phone. Antonio, I said, hating how my voice betrayed me, cracking on his name. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end, the kind of loaded silence that preceded his most dangerous moments. Eva. His voice was controlled, precise, the accent he usually suppressed more pronounced with emotion. What do you think you're doing with my son? He's my son too, I said, the words rushing out before I could stop them. And I'm keeping him safe. A low, humorless laugh. Safe? You think he's safer away from me? Away from his father? Away from everything I can provide? Safe from what you are, I whispered, turning away from Marco, trying to create even the illusion of privacy. From what you do. And what exactly do you think I am, Ava? The dangerous edge in his voice made me shiver. The man who gave you everything? The man who would burn this city to the ground before letting anyone hurt you or our son? A monster, I said, the word escaping like a confession. A killer. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, almost wounded. You've known what I am from the beginning, And you stayed. You chose me. You carried my child. I was wrong, I said, tears finally breaking through. I made a mistake. No. The word was final. Absolute. The mistake is what you're doing now, running away like a thief in the night, taking what's mine. Jamie isn't property, I said, anger flaring through the fear. You're right. His voice dropped lower. He's more. He's my blood, my legacy. And you, Eva, you are the mother of my child. Do you have any idea what that means to me? What you both mean? I closed my eyes, fighting against the pull of his words. This was how it always was with Antonio, the threat and the tenderness, inextricably tangled. Come home, he said, and it wasn't a request. Marco will bring you and Jamie home, and we can forget this happened. And if I don't? I asked, already knowing the answer. Then I will come for you myself, and I will take back what's mine. His voice softened again, a lover's murmur. You and the child are mine, Ava. There is nowhere in this world you can go where I won't find you. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. Marco picked it up smoothly, his expression unchanged as he listened to whatever Antonio was saying. Yes, sir, he said finally. Right away, sir. He ended the call and pocketed the phone, then looked at me with that same unsettling pity. Mr. Castellanos has sent a car for you, he said. He's very eager to see his son. Jamie was crying now, full-throated wails that echoed through the bus station. I bounced him desperately, whispering soothing nonsense, my mind racing for a way out, an escape, anything. But Marco's hand was firm on my elbow, guiding me away from the bus, away from freedom. The other two men fell into step behind us, an escort for precious cargo. Outside, the black SUV waited, its engine running, windows tinted to conceal whoever was inside. Marco opened the back door, and I hesitated, my last moment of defiance. He loves you, Marco said quietly, unexpectedly. I've never seen him like this over anyone. That's not love, I replied, stepping into the darkness of the car with my son clutched to my chest. That's ownership. As the door closed behind me, I knew with sickening certainty that I had made a terrible miscalculation. I hadn't understood the depth of Antonio's possessiveness, hadn't truly comprehended what it meant to be claimed by a man like him. The car pulled away from the curb, taking me back to the gilded cage I'd so desperately tried to escape. Back to Antonio. Back to the life I'd tried to leave behind. And as the bus station disappeared from view, I looked down at Jamie, now quiet and solemn in my arms, and made him a silent promise. This wasn't over. I would find another way out for both of us. Because no matter what Antonio believed, no matter what he claimed, Jamie was my son. And I would die before I let him become his father's son. The car moved through Boston's empty streets like a shark through dark water, silent, purposeful, predatory. Jamie had fallen asleep against my chest, exhausted from the disruption to his routine, while I remained rigid, staring out at the passing city. Each familiar landmark felt like an accusation. The neon sign of the 24-hour pharmacy where I'd bought Jamie's first pacifier. The park where I'd walked endless circles in the early days after his birth, desperately trying to soothe his colic. The diner where I'd worked until my 7th month of pregnancy, when Antonio had finally put his foot down. You don't need to work, he'd said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. My woman doesn't serve coffee to strangers. My son doesn't grow inside a waitress. I'd argued then, one of the few times I'd stood my ground with him, insisting on keeping my job, my independence, the small piece of normal life that existed outside his world. In the end, he'd compromised by buying the diner, installing Sophia as manager, and ensuring I'd never have to work again unless I wanted to. A compromise that wasn't a compromise at all. Just another form of control. We're almost there, Marco said from the front seat, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. There was something like sympathy in his gaze, quickly masked. Mr. Castellanos is waiting. Of course he was. Antonio Castellanos didn't wait for anyone, except apparently for a woman who had dared to leave him and take his son. The SUV turned onto the private drive that led to Antonio's Back Bay mansion. a towering Victorian monstrosity that had intimidated me from the first moment I saw it. 3 stories of dark stone and gleaming windows, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that was as much for keeping people out as for keeping us in. The house where Jamie had been born. The house I'd tried so desperately to escape. The gates opened automatically as we approached, closing behind us with an ominous clang of finality. The car circled the fountain in the center of the drive and came to a stop at the foot of the marble steps leading to the front door. Before Marco could exit the driver's seat, the massive oak door swung open, and there he was. Antonio. Even after everything, the sight of him stole my breath. He stood in the doorway like a statue carved from darkness, tall, imposing, devastating in his tailored black suit. His olive skin seemed paler than usual, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and jaw. His black hair, usually meticulously styled, looked as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly, but it was his eyes that held me, dark as midnight, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I'd seen those eyes filled with many emotions over our years together. Amusement, desire, cold fury directed at others. But never had I seen them look the way they did now, burning with a volatile mixture of rage, relief, and something else I couldn't name, something that frightened me more than his anger ever could. Marco opened my door, and I stepped out on unsteady legs, still clutching Jamie to my chest like a shield. For a moment, no one moved. The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire about to snap. Then Antonio descended the steps, his movements controlled, deliberate. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that I could smell his familiar cologne, sandalwood and spice, but far enough that we weren't touching. His gaze dropped to Jamie, still peacefully sleeping, unaware of the storm brewing around him. "Bring them inside," he said to Marco, his voice dangerously soft, his eyes never leaving our son. "Then leave us." My heart hammered against my ribs as Marco escorted us up the steps, past Antonio, whose presence I felt like a physical weight as we moved by him. The foyer was exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago. Marble floors gleaming, crystal chandelier casting fractured light across the space, fresh flowers arranged in a massive vase on the antique table, a perfect, pristine facade concealing the darkness at its core. The door closed behind us with a heavy thud. Marco disappeared through a side door, and then we were alone. Antonio, Jamie, and me, standing in the entryway of the house that had been both haven and prison. "Give him to me," Antonio said, extending his arms toward Jamie. I tightened my hold instinctively. "He's sleeping." Antonio's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking visibly. "Give me my son, Eva." The command in his voice made me flinch, but I held my ground. "You'll wake him." For a moment I thought he would insist, would simply take Jamie from my arms. Instead, he inhaled deeply, visibly reining in his temper. "Fine," he said finally. "Then come." He turned and walked toward his study, expecting me to follow without question, and despite everything in me screaming to run, to fight, to do anything but obey, I did follow, because what choice did I have? We were back in his world now, playing by his rules. The study was the heart of Antonio's domain, a large room lined with leather-bound books he rarely read, and decorated with antiques that spoke of old money and older power. The massive mahogany desk dominated the space, behind which hung a portrait of his grandfather, the man who had established the Castellanos family in Boston decades ago. Antonio closed the door behind us, then moved to the bar cart in the corner. The soft clink of crystal against crystal as he poured himself a drink was the only sound in the room. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs facing the desk. I remained standing, shifting Jamie's weight in my arms. He was getting heavier, my muscles aching from holding him for so long, but I wasn't ready to put him down. Not here. Not yet. Antonio turned, tumbler of amber liquid in hand, his eyes narrowing at my defiance. "You run away with my child in the middle of the night," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "You disappear without a word, without a trace. You attempt to board a bus to, where was it? Portland?" He took a sip of his drink. "And now you stand in my house and continue to defy me?" "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Antonio set his glass down with deliberate care. "Nothing that wasn't yours," he repeated, advancing toward me with slow, measured steps. "Jamie is my son, my blood, my legacy." "He's a baby," I countered. "Not a possession, not a legacy. A child who deserves better than—" I stopped myself, but it was too late. Better than what? Antonio was directly in front of me now, close enough that I had to tilt my chin up to meet his gaze. Better than me? Better than the life I can provide? Better than a father who would move heaven and earth for him? Better than a father who hurts people? I whispered. Better than growing up surrounded by violence and fear. Something flickered in Antonio's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or genuine confusion. I have never let any violence touch you. I have never raised my hand to you. I have protected you from the ugliness of this world. By what? Keeping me locked in a golden cage? The words spilled out before I could stop them. By controlling my every move? By making me dependent on you for everything? I gave you everything you could possibly want, he said, his voice rising slightly. Everything. Except freedom, I replied, the truth of it burning in my throat. Antonio's laugh was harsh, humorless. Freedom, he repeated, as if testing the word. And is that what you found out there? Freedom? Hiding in a bus station with my son, with nothing but a bag of clothes and whatever cash you could steal from me? I didn't steal. No? His eyebrows rose. The $10,000 missing from my safe says otherwise. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd taken the money, yes, desperate and terrified, and knowing I needed resources to start over. But I'd convinced myself it wasn't stealing. That after everything I'd given Antonio, my body, my heart, my freedom, our son, I was entitled to that small fraction of his wealth. I needed it, I said finally, for Jamie. If you needed money for our son, you had only to ask, Antonio said, his voice softening dangerously. I have never denied you anything, but you didn't ask, did you? You took. You ran. Like a thief in the night. Jamie stirred in my arms, making small fussing noises that I recognized as the prelude to hungry cries. The tension in the room was getting to him, disturbing his sleep. He needs to eat, I said, grateful for the interruption, for any excuse to escape this confrontation. Antonio's expression changed instantly, concern for his son overriding his anger at me. Then feed him, he said, stepping back to give me space. His nursery is as you left it. I nodded, relieved to have a momentary reprieve, and headed for the door. Eva, Antonio called after me, making me pause with my hand on the doorknob. Don't mistake this for forgiveness. We are far from finished with this conversation. The nursery was exactly as I'd left it. A beautiful room decorated in soft blues and greens, with a hand-painted mural of a forest scene covering one wall, the crib that had cost more than a year's rent at my old apartment, the rocking chair where I'd spent countless nights nursing Jamie back to sleep, the changing table stocked with more supplies than we could use in a month. Everything perfect. Everything expensive. Everything chosen by Antonio. As I settled into the rocking chair to feed Jamie, the familiar routine calmed me despite everything. This at least was something Antonio couldn't touch. The bond between mother and child, the quiet moments that belonged only to us. Jamie latched on eagerly, his tiny fist resting against my breast, his dark eyes, so like his father's, gazing up at me with complete trust. Tears pricked at my eyes as I stroked his soft cheek. I'm sorry, baby, I whispered. I'm so sorry I couldn't get us away. But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't giving up. This setback, being caught, being brought back, was just that, a setback. I would find another way. I would be smarter, more prepared. He has grown. I nearly jumped at Antonio's voice from the doorway. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't realized he was watching us. He stood there now, shoulder propped against the frame, his expression softer than I'd seen it since my return. Babies do that, I said, attempting to cover my chest more fully with the nursing blanket. Antonio entered the room slowly, as if trying not to startle a wild animal. He crossed to the window, looking out at the garden below rather than at us. 3 days, he said quietly. You were gone 3 days, and I missed 3 days of his life. 3 days I can never get back. The genuine ache in his voice caught me off guard. Antonio rarely showed vulnerability, rarely exposed any emotion that could be perceived as weakness. He's only 6 months old, I said. There will be... Will there? Antonio turned to face me, his expression unreadable. Or were you planning to disappear forever? To raise my son without me? To tell him what about his father? That I was a monster? A killer? Or perhaps you wouldn't tell him about me at all? I looked away, unable to meet his gaze, because he was right. I had planned to disappear completely, to start over somewhere Antonio could never find us. To give Jamie a normal life, far from the shadows and secrets of the Castellanos Empire. You had no right, Antonio continued, his voice hardening again. No right to take him from me. I'm his mother, I said, meeting his gaze defiantly. I have every right to protect my child. Protect him. Antonio's laugh was bitter. From what? From a father who would die for him? From a life of privilege and power? From his birthright? From becoming like you, I said, the words hanging in the air between us like a physical thing. Antonio went very still. For a moment, he simply stared at me, his face a mask of control. Then he moved forward, kneeling beside the rocking chair so that we were eye to eye. And what exactly is wrong with being like me, Ava? He asked softly. I swallowed hard. You hurt people, I whispered. You kill people. To protect what's mine, he replied without hesitation. To protect my family, to protect you and Jamie. That doesn't make it right, doesn't it? His hand reached out, hovering near Jamie's head but not quite touching him. In this world, Eva, there are predators and prey. I refuse to be prey. I refuse to let my son be prey. There's another option, I argued. Not being part of that world at all. Antonio's smile was sad, almost pitying. There is no escaping the world, cara mia. There is only choosing your place within it. His fingers finally made contact with Jamie's soft hair, stroking it gently. I've chosen mine. I've built something that will protect our son long after I'm gone. Jamie had finished nursing, his eyes growing heavy again. I adjusted my clothing and lifted him to my shoulder, patting his back gently. The familiar rhythm, the weight of him against me, the small sounds he made, centered me, reminded me why I had to be strong. I want more for him, I said finally. More than violence and fear. More than power bought with blood. And you think I don't? Antonio stood, towering over us once more. You think I want my son to live as I have? To make the choices I've had to make? He shook his head. Everything I've done, everything, has been to ensure he won't have to. That he can rule from a position of legitimacy, of respect. Rule, I echoed, the word chilling me. He's a baby, Antonio. He doesn't need to rule anything, not yet, Antonio conceded. But someday the Castellanos Empire will be his, and he will need to be strong enough, smart enough, ruthless enough to keep it. His gaze softened as it fell on Jamie's sleeping form. But he will have advantages I never had. A proper education, the right connections, a father who has already eliminated the worst threats, and a mother. His eyes lifted to mine. A mother who brings compassion to balance the necessary ruthlessness. A perfect combination. The way he spoke, so certain, so calculating, plotting our son's future before he could even walk, made me sick with dread. I won't let you turn him into a monster, I said, the words barely audible. Antonio's expression hardened. Careful, Eva, he warned. You're speaking of the future I've built for our son, for our family. A future I never agreed to, didn't you? He raised an eyebrow. When you came to my bed? When you accepted my ring? When you carried my child? What did you think you were agreeing to, if not this? I had no answer. Because the truth was, I hadn't thought. Not really. I'd been dazzled by Antonio's intensity, his focus, the way he'd made me feel like the center of his universe. I'd willfully ignored the signs, the whispered warnings, the moments when the mask of civilized businessman slipped to reveal the predator beneath. I'd told myself the rumors were exaggerated, that the fear in people's eyes when they saw him was respect, not terror. That the blood on his hands was metaphorical, not literal. I'd lied to myself until the moment I held Jamie in my arms and realized I couldn't lie anymore. Antonio must have read something of my thoughts in my face, because his expression softened. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear with unexpected gentleness. "You're exhausted," he said. "We both are. This conversation can wait until morning." I nodded, too tired to argue further, too aware of the futility of it. Antonio stepped back, allowing me to stand with Jamie still cradled against my shoulder. "Will you sleep in our bedroom tonight?" he asked. And there was something almost vulnerable in the question. "No," I said quickly, too quickly. I'll stay in the nursery, with Jamie." Something flickered in Antonio's eyes. Hurt, perhaps, or anger quickly suppressed. "As you wish," he said formally. "Marco will remain in the house tonight, as will Vito and Dominic." The message was clear. Don't try to run again. We'll talk in the morning when we're both more reasonable. He stepped aside to let me pass, but as I moved by him, his hand caught my wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough that I couldn't pull away. "Eva," he said, his voice low and intense, "don't ever try to take him from me again. I found you this time with minimal effort. Next time I won't be so gentle." A shiver ran down my spine at the quiet threat. Is that what this was? Gentle? His thumb traced circles on the inside of my wrist, a caress that once would have melted me. "You have no idea how far I would go to keep what's mine," he said softly. "Pray you never find out." He released me then, and I hurried from the room, Jamie still sleeping peacefully against me, unaware of the storm brewing around his tiny existence. In the nursery, I settled Jamie in his crib, watching his little chest rise and fall with each breath. Then I sank into the rocking chair, too wired to sleep despite my exhaustion. Antonio's words echoed in my mind. "You have no idea how far I would go to keep what's mine." But he was wrong. I did know. I'd always known deep down. It was why I'd run in the first place. It was why, even now, returned to this beautiful prison, I was already planning my next escape. Because Antonio Castellanos would burn the world to the ground to keep what he considered his. And somewhere along the way, Jamie and I had become possessions rather than people in his eyes. I leaned my head back against the chair, staring at the ceiling, a grim determination settling over me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Tomorrow I would begin again. I would be smarter, more careful, more prepared. Because while Antonio might be willing to burn the world for us, I was willing to do something far more dangerous. I was willing to defy him to save my son from becoming his father's son. Morning came too soon, filtering through the curtains in soft golden beams that danced across Jamie's crib. I hadn't meant to fall asleep in the rocking chair, but exhaustion had eventually won out. My neck protested as I straightened, muscles stiff from the awkward position. For one disorienting moment, I forgot where I was, reaching instinctively for the cheap alarm clock that had sat beside the motel bed where we'd spent the last 3 nights. Reality crashed back as Jamie's morning babble filled the room. I was back in Antonio's mansion, back in the gilded cage. I crossed to the crib, and Jamie's face lit up when he saw me, tiny hands reaching upward, legs kicking with excitement. The pure joy in his expression momentarily pushed aside my fear and uncertainty. Whatever happened, whatever I had to face, this moment, this love, made it all worthwhile. "Good morning, my love," I whispered, lifting him into my arms. "Did you sleep well?" Jamie's response was a happy gurgle and a wet, open-mouthed kiss against my cheek that made me laugh despite everything. I changed his diaper and dressed him in a soft blue onesie from the dresser, trying not to think about how all his clothes were still here, as if Antonio had been absolutely certain we would return, as if he'd never doubted his ability to bring us back. The thought sobered me as I carried Jamie downstairs. The house was quiet, filled with the kind of heavy stillness that made every footstep echo. I hesitated at the bottom of the grand staircase, unsure where to go. Part of me wanted to retreat back to the nursery, to delay the inevitable confrontation with Antonio for as long as possible. But Jamie was hungry, and I needed coffee if I was going to face whatever came next. I made my way to the kitchen, a massive space with gleaming stainless steel appliances and marble countertops that had always felt more like a showroom than a place where people actually cooked and ate. To my surprise, Antonio was already there, seated at the island with a cup of espresso and the morning paper spread before him. He looked up when we entered, and for a moment, I saw naked relief in his expression, as if he'd feared we might have somehow disappeared in the night despite his guards. He was impeccably dressed as always, in a charcoal suit that had undoubtedly cost more than most people's monthly salary, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. Only the faint shadows under his eyes betrayed that last night had affected him at all. "Good morning," he said, setting down his cup. His eyes moved from me to Jamie, softening visibly. "And good morning to you, Piccolo mio." Jamie, traitorously, beamed at the sound of his father's voice, squirming in my arms and reaching toward Antonio with eager hands. Antonio rose immediately, crossing to us with his arms extended. "May I?" he asked, and though his tone was polite, there was steel beneath the question. This was not really a request. I hesitated only briefly before passing Jamie to him. Antonio cradled our son with practiced ease, murmuring to him in Italian, endearments and promises I only half understood, but that made something twist painfully in my chest. Jamie patted his father's cheeks with chubby hands, completely at ease, completely trusting. "He missed you," I said quietly, the admission slipping out unbidden. It was true. Even during our 3 days away, Jamie had fussed more than usual, as if sensing his father's absence. Antonio's gaze lifted to mine, something vulnerable flickering behind his usual mask of control. "I missed him too," he said. "More than I thought possible." He paused, his dark eyes holding mine. "I missed you both." I looked away, unable to bear the weight of those words, the emotions behind them. Instead, I moved to the refrigerator, focusing on the familiar routine of preparing Jamie's breakfast. "Maria made his favorite," Antonio said, nodding toward a container of pureed sweet potatoes. "She'll be back this afternoon." I gave the staff the morning off. I thought we should talk privately. Of course he had. Antonio never left anything to chance, never had conversations he didn't control completely, including who might overhear them. I took the container and emptied it into a small bowl, warming it briefly in the microwave. When I turned back, Antonio had settled Jamie in his high chair, carefully fastening the straps with a tenderness that few outside this house would believe him capable of. "Coffee?" he offered, already moving to the espresso machine. "Please," I said, setting Jamie's breakfast down to cool. The domesticity of the scene was surreal, as if last night hadn't happened, as if I hadn't tried to flee with our son, as if Antonio hadn't sent his men to hunt us down and bring us back. Antonio handed me a cup of coffee, prepared exactly as I liked it. A touch of cream, no sugar. A small reminder that he noticed everything, remembered everything. "You look tired," he said, his gaze traveling over my face, taking in the dark circles under my eyes, the tension in my shoulders. "You should have slept in our bed. It would have been more comfortable." I sipped my coffee, buying time before responding. "I wanted to stay with Jamie." Antonio nodded, accepting this explanation, though we both knew it was only partially true. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the stools at the island. "Eat something. We need to talk, but not while you're running on empty." Part of me wanted to refuse on principle, to reject even this small act of care, but he was right. I was exhausted, lightheaded from lack of sleep and proper food. I sat, and Antonio placed a plate of fruit and pastries before me before returning to Jamie, lifting a small spoon of sweet potatoes to his eager mouth. The sight of Antonio, feared boss of one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the East Coast, carefully feeding our son, praising him for each successful bite, wiping drips from his chin with infinite patience, was a stark reminder of the contradiction at the heart of our situation. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, devoted, attentive, capable of incredible tenderness. And this was also the man I feared, controlling, possessive, capable of unspeakable violence. I ate mechanically, not tasting the food, but grateful for the energy it provided. Antonio remained focused on Jamie, giving me the space to gather my thoughts. to prepare for whatever came next. When Jamie's bowl was empty and his face was cleaned of orange smears, Antonio lifted him from the high chair and set him in the playpen in the corner of the kitchen, a space filled with toys and books where he could safely entertain himself while still in our sight. Then Antonio returned to the island, taking the stool across from me, his espresso cradled between his hands. "So?" he said simply, his dark eyes fixing on mine with laser-like intensity. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be the first to look away. "So?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Still defiant," he murmured. "It's what drew me to you in the first place, you know. That fire, that refusal to be intimidated." His expression hardened. "But there's a difference between defiance and betrayal, Ava." "I didn't betray you," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "I was protecting my son, our son," he corrected sharply. "And protecting him from what, exactly? From a father who loves him? From a life of privilege and security? From his birthright?" "From your world," I said. "From what you do. From what that could do to him." Antonio leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "My world has existed for generations, Eva. Long before you, long before Jamie. The Castellanos family has built something that lasts, something that protects its own. At what cost?" I countered. "How many lives have been destroyed to build this empire you're so proud of? How many people have suffered so the Castellanos family could protect its own?" A dangerous glint appeared in Antonio's eyes. "You knew who I was when you came to my bed," he said softly. "You knew when you accepted my ring. You knew when you agreed to carry my child." "Did I?" I set down my coffee cup before my shaking hands could betray me. "I knew you were powerful. I knew your family had connections. But I didn't know the extent of it until later, until I was already in too deep." Antonio's laugh was short, humorless. "You expect me to believe that? You who are smarter than most of my advisors? Who notices everything, questions everything? No, Ava. You knew. You simply chose not to look too closely because you liked the benefits that came with my world." His words stung because there was truth in them. I had suspected more than I admitted to myself. I had looked away from certain conversations, certain late-night meetings. I had accepted the luxury, the security, the power that came from being Antonio Castellanos' woman, without questioning too deeply where it all came from. Until Jamie. "Maybe you're right," I admitted. "Maybe I did close my eyes to certain things. But becoming a mother, it changes you. It changes how you see the world. Suddenly, the things that seemed acceptable, or at least things I could ignore, became intolerable when I thought about Jamie growing up surrounded by them." Something flickered in Antonio's expression. Understanding, perhaps, or the memory of his own mother, who had died when he was young. "So you ran," he said. And there was a new note in his voice. Not anger now, but something like hurt. "You took my son, and you ran without a word, without giving me a chance to address your concerns. Would it have made a difference?" I asked. "If I had come to you and said I wanted out, that I wanted Jamie out, would you have let us go?" Antonio's silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. "You didn't even try," he replied, an edge creeping back into his voice. "You didn't trust me enough to have the conversation. Instead, you stole my child and disappeared. I did what I thought was necessary to protect him. From me." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with pain and accusation. "Not just from you," I said, softening slightly at the genuine hurt in his eyes. "From all of it. The violence, the enemies, the constant threat. What kind of life is that for a child?" "It's the only life I know," Antonio said simply, "and I've turned out—" "Have you?" I interrupted. "Have you really turned out all right, Antonio? Can you honestly tell me you don't carry scars from growing up as you did? From losing your mother so young? From watching your father rule through fear?" His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking visibly. "My father did what was necessary to secure our family's position, just as I do now. And is that what you want for Jamie? To grow up learning that violence is necessary? That fear is a tool? That people are either assets or obstacles? I want him to be strong, Antonio said, his voice hardening. I want him to be respected. I want him to be safe. I want those things too, I replied. But I also want him to be kind, to be compassionate, to know right from wrong. And you don't think I can teach him those things? Antonio's voice was dangerously quiet. I met his gaze directly. Can you? When was the last time you showed mercy to someone who crossed you? When was the last time compassion factored into a business decision? Antonio stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the garden. His back was rigid, hands clasped behind him in a posture I recognized. He was struggling for control, fighting to keep his emotions in check. You see only one side of me, he said finally, not turning around. The side that protects. The side that ensures our safety, our prosperity. You don't see the mercy I show to those who deserve it, the loyalty I reward, the families I support when one of my men falls. He paused. You don't see the world as it is, Eva, a place where the strong survive and the weak are devoured. I wasn't born into this life by choice, but I've embraced it because the alternative was to become one of the devoured. He turned back to me, his expression more open, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. I don't want that for Jamie. I don't want him to face the choices I've had to face. That's why I've built what I have, so that he can rule from a position of established strength without having to prove himself through blood the way I did. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time, I glimpsed the burden Antonio carried. The weight of his empire, the responsibility for countless lives, the constant vigilance required to maintain his position. But what if he doesn't want to rule at all? I asked softly. What if he wants a normal life? College, a regular job, a family not connected to all this. Antonio's smile was sad, almost pitying. There is no normal life for a Castellanos, Eva. Even if he walked away, even if I allowed that, he would always be my son, always be a target for my enemies, always carry the weight of his name. He crossed back to the island, leaning forward, his dark eyes intense. The only safety for him, for both of you, is with me, under my protection, within my world. Jamie made a noise from his playpen. Not quite a cry, but a demand for attention. Antonio immediately straightened, crossing to lift our son into his arms. Jamie settled against his father's chest contentedly, tiny fingers playing with the silk tie that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill. The sight pierced me, this dangerous man who held our son with such gentle care, who looked at him with such naked adoration, who, in his own warped way, believed everything he did was for our protection. I want what's best for him too, I said quietly. That's all I've ever wanted. Antonio's gaze lifted from Jamie to me. Then we want the same thing, he said. The question is whether we can find a way to provide it together. I took a deep breath. And if I still believe that means getting him away from all this? Antonio's expression hardened, though his hold on Jamie remained gentle. That is not an option, Eva. Not now. Not ever. You and Jamie are mine, my family, my responsibility, my reason for existence. There is nowhere on this earth you could go that I wouldn't find you. No one who could hide you from me. No force that could keep me from what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice sent a chill down my spine, even as some traitorous part of me responded to the raw intensity of his claim. So I'm a prisoner, I said flatly. No. Antonio shook his head. You're my wife, in all but legal formality, and the mother of my child. This is your home. Your place is here, with me, with our son. And if I don't accept that? His smile was gentle but implacable. You will. In time. Because you're smart enough to see the reality of our situation. Because you love Jamie enough to want him to have both his parents. Because despite everything, there's still something between us that neither of us can deny. He crossed to where I sat, Jamie still in his arms, and reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. The casual intimacy of the gesture made my breath catch. I'm not giving up on us, Eva, he said softly. I'm not giving up on our family. I can be patient. I can give you time to adjust, to accept. What I cannot, will not, do is let you take my son from me again. On this, there is no compromise. The finality in his voice made it clear that this particular battle was lost, at least for now. Jamie needed stability, needed both his parents, needed time for me to figure out a better plan. One that didn't involve running with nothing but what we could carry. I need time, I said finally. Time to process everything, to adjust to being back. Antonio nodded. Of course, accepting take all the time victory. You need. But understand this, cara mia. While you are processing, while you are adjusting, you will do so here, in this house, under my protection. His voice softened. I don't want to be your jailer, Ava. I want to be your partner, your protector, the father of your children. Children, plural, as if Jamie was just the beginning of the dynasty Antonio envisioned. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, echoing through the cavernous hallway. Antonio frowned slightly, clearly not expecting visitors, especially with the staff gone. Wait here, he said, passing Jamie back to me. There was a new tension in his movements, a subtle shift from father to predator that I'd seen many times before. He reached into his jacket, and I knew without seeing that his hand was resting on the gun he always carried. I held Jamie close, a fresh wave of anxiety washing over me. This was the reality of our life with Antonio, the constant undercurrent of danger, the knowledge that there were people in the world who would hurt us to get to him, or hurt him to get to us. Antonio disappeared into the hallway, and I heard the low murmur of voices, his and another man's, one I didn't recognize. The conversation was brief, and then Antonio returned, a large manila envelope in his hand, and a strange expression on his face. What is it? I asked, unable to keep the fear from my voice. What's wrong? Antonio held up the envelope. Information, he said cryptically, about your departure. He set it on the island, not opening it yet. It seems there may have been more to your sudden flight than I realized. My heart hammered against my ribs. What could he possibly mean? I'd left because I wanted to protect Jamie from Antonio's world. It was as simple and as complicated as that. What are you talking about? I asked. Antonio studied my face intently, as if searching for signs of deception. Did someone help you leave, Eva? Someone outside my organization? I blinked in confusion. What? No, I planned it myself. I took the money, bought the burner phone, arranged... Then how do you explain this? Antonio opened the envelope and spread several photographs across the island. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the images. Me, 3 days ago, hurrying into a small motel on the outskirts of the city, Jamie clutched to my chest. Me, later that same day, speaking with a man I'd never seen before, a tall, lean figure with close-cropped gray hair and the rigid posture of someone with military training. Who is he, Eva? Antonio's voice was dangerously soft. And what did he offer you to betray me? I've never seen him before, I stammered, genuine confusion making my voice shake. I mean, yes, he approached me at the motel, but I thought he was just another guest. He asked about Jamie, made small talk. I didn't tell him anything. Antonio's expression darkened. So it's just coincidence that Vincent Caruso's right-hand man happened to approach you and my son in some backwater motel? Just chance that the very day you fled, Caruso's organization began moving in on territory I've held for a decade. The name meant nothing to me, but the implication was clear. Antonio thought I'd been working with his enemies, using Jamie and me as leverage in some larger power play. I swear to you, I had no idea who he was, I said, instinctively holding Jamie closer. I was just trying to get away, to start over somewhere. I didn't contact anyone, didn't plan to meet anyone. Antonio was silent for a long moment, studying me with the calculating gaze that had made hardened criminals confess their sins. If you're lying to me, Eva, the threat hung unfinished between us. I'm not, I said, meeting his gaze directly. I would never endanger Jamie that way. Never. Something in my expression must have convinced him, because the deadly tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Then it seems Caruso's men have been watching my house, he said grimly. Waiting for an opportunity, and you handed it to them when you left. He gathered the photographs back into the envelope, his movements precise, controlled. This changes things. Changes what? I asked, a new fear gripping me. Antonio's gaze was steel. It's no longer just about you trying to leave me, Eva. It's about enemies who would use you and my son against me. His hand cupped Jamie's head gently, protectively. I will not allow that to happen. What are you going to do? I asked, dreading the answer. What I must, he replied simply. To protect what's mine. He checked his watch. I need to make some calls. We'll continue this discussion later. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to Jamie's forehead, then, after a brief hesitation, brushed his lips against my temple, a gesture both tender and possessive. Remember what I said, Eva, he murmured against my skin. There is nowhere you could go that I wouldn't find you. No one who could protect you from me. His voice softened, and there is no one who would protect you as I will. With that, he strode from the kitchen, already pulling out his phone, leaving me with Jamie in my arms and a new, terrifying understanding of our situation. It wasn't just Antonio I had to fear now. It wasn't just his world that threatened to swallow us. There were others, enemies I'd never met, whose names I'd never heard, who saw Jamie and me as pawns in a game I didn't understand. And in that moment, as much as it terrified me to admit it, Antonio's protection seemed like the lesser of two evils. The gilded cage had never felt more like a fortress, or more like a trap. Antonio didn't return for hours. The silence in the house stretched like a living thing, broken only by Jamie's occasional babbles and cries. I moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, mechanically tending to Jamie's needs while my mind raced with implications of those photographs. Who was Vincent Caruso? What did he want with us? And how long had his men been watching the house? Watching me, without my knowledge. By mid-afternoon, Jamie was down for his nap, and I found myself drawn to Antonio's study. I hesitated at the door, knowing he kept it locked when he wasn't home. To my surprise, the handle turned easily under my touch. The room smelled of leather, expensive cologne, and the faint trace of the Cuban cigars Antonio occasionally indulged in. I moved to his desk, running my fingers over the polished mahogany surface. This was the heart of his operation, where decisions were made that affected countless lives, including, it seemed, my own in ways I hadn't fully comprehended. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found myself at his computer. Password protected, of course, and then at the filing cabinet beside it. Also locked. My search grew more determined, more desperate, opening drawers, checking bookshelves, looking for any information about this Caruso, about the danger we might be in. You won't find anything there. I whirled around to find Antonio standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. How long had he been watching me? I wasn't... Yes, you were. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, looking for information about Caruso, about the threat to you and Jamie. I lifted my chin, refusing to be ashamed. Shouldn't I know what's happening? What kind of danger we're in? Antonio studied me for a long moment before crossing to the bar cart and pouring himself a drink. He didn't offer me one. Vincent Caruso runs the organization that controls most of Providence and parts of Connecticut, he said finally. He's been trying to expand into Boston for years. He took a sip of his whiskey. The man who approached you was Michael Donovan, former Special Forces, now Caruso's head of security and occasional enforcer. I swear I didn't tell him anything, I said. I barely spoke to him. I believe you, Antonio replied, surprising me. Donovan is too smart to reveal himself to you if there had been prior contact. No, this was opportunistic. They saw you leave and followed, hoping to use you somehow. His eyes darkened. Perhaps planning to take you and Jamie, to use you as leverage against me. A chill ran through me at the thought, but why now? Why me? Antonio's smile was grim. Because you're my weakness, Ava, you and Jamie. Everyone knows it. He finished his drink in one swift motion. And now I need to show Caruso and everyone else that targeting my family is a fatal mistake. The coldness in his voice frightened me more than his anger ever had. What are you going to do? That doesn't concern you, he said, setting down his glass. What concerns you is that until this situation is resolved, neither you nor Jamie will leave this house without me, or at least 2 of my men with you. The security system has been upgraded. Additional guards have been posted. His gaze pinned me in place. There will be no more escape attempts. For your own protection as well as my peace of mind. So we're prisoners, I said flatly. No. Antonio crossed to me, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, the subtle scent of his cologne. Your precious cargo, You're what matters most to me in this world, and I will do whatever is necessary to keep you safe." His hand reached up to cup my cheek, the touch surprisingly gentle. "I know you don't understand my world, Eva. I know you fear it, but sometimes fear is the appropriate response to a dangerous reality." I pulled away from his touch, though part of me wanted to lean into it, to accept the comfort and security he offered. "And what about Jamie? Do you want him to grow up in fear too?" Antonio's expression hardened. "What I want is for him to grow up. Period. And in this world with enemies like Caruso, that means protecting him by any means necessary, even if those means destroy the very thing that makes him worth protecting," I countered. "His innocence, his capacity for compassion, his soul. Better a living son with a compromised soul than a dead one with his innocence intact," Antonio replied harshly. We stared at each other, at an impasse I couldn't see a way around. Two fundamentally different worldviews, two incompatible visions for our son's future. And Antonio held all the power. The intercom on Antonio's desk buzzed, breaking the tense silence. "Sir," came Marco's voice. "The package has been delivered." Antonio pressed the response button. "Good. Prepare the car. We leave in 10 minutes. Yes, sir." He turned back to me. "I have business to attend to. I'll be back late. Maria is here to help with Jamie, and Marco will remain at the house." His gaze softened slightly. "Try to rest, Eva. You're still exhausted from your adventure." The way he said it, dismissing my desperate attempt at freedom as some sort of childish escapade, made anger flare in my chest. "You can't keep us locked up forever, Antonio," I said. "This isn't a life. It's a prison." His smile was sad, almost pitying. "Perhaps, but it's a prison that will keep you alive." He checked his watch. "I need to go. We'll continue this discussion later." He paused at the door. "And Eva? Next time you want information about my business, just ask. Searching my study will only make me question your motives." The subtle threat in his words hung in the air long after he'd gone. Days passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Antonio came and went, often absent for long hours, but always returning, always checking on Jamie with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the cold efficiency I glimpsed in his business dealings. More than once I overheard tense phone conversations in Italian, fragments of plans and countermoves in a game I didn't understand, but that seemed to be escalating. The security around the house tightened visibly. Men I'd never seen before patrolled the grounds. New cameras appeared on the perimeter walls. The windows, I discovered, had been replaced with what I suspected was bulletproof glass, and through it all, Jamie thrived, oblivious to the danger surrounding us. He rolled over for the first time, his delighted giggles at his new skill bringing tears to my eyes. He began to babble more consistently, experimenting with sounds that might someday become words. Antonio was there for these milestones, appearing almost magically when Jamie achieved something new, as if he had a sixth sense for his son's development. And in those moments, watching Antonio's face transform with genuine joy as Jamie rolled toward him, reached for him, recognized him, I caught glimpses of the man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd once believed could change, could be more than the violence and control that defined his world. A dangerous hope, perhaps, but hope nonetheless. A week after our return, Antonio came home earlier than usual, a strange energy surrounding him. He found me in the nursery, reading to Jamie before his bedtime routine. "We need to talk," he said, hovering in the doorway. "After he's asleep." Something in his tone made my heart race, but I nodded, continuing the story while Antonio watched, his expression unreadable. When Jamie finally drifted off, Antonio led me to the master bedroom, a room I hadn't entered since our return. It was exactly as I remembered, luxurious, tasteful, dominated by the massive four-poster bed where we'd spent countless nights together, where Jamie had likely been conceived. The intimacy of the space made me uncomfortable after the distance that had grown between us. Antonio closed the door and turned to me, his dark eyes intense. "The situation with Caruso is coming to a head," he said without preamble. "My sources tell me he's planning something significant, possibly within the next few days." "What kind of something?" I asked, fear rising in my throat. The kind that would require moving you and Jamie to a more secure location, he replied, temporarily. More secure than this fortress? I gestured around us. Where exactly would that be? I have a property in Vermont, remote, defensible, unknown to most of my associates. He moved to the dresser, opening a drawer and removing something I couldn't see. We would go tomorrow, just the three of us, plus Marco and 2 other men I trust implicitly. The thought of being taken even further from civilization, further from any possibility of escape, made panic rise in my chest. For how long? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Until it's safe, Antonio said simply, until Caruso is no longer a threat. The implication hung in the air between us. Until Caruso was dead, until Antonio had eliminated yet another enemy, adding more blood to his hands in the name of protecting what was his. And if I don't want to go? I asked, already knowing the answer. Antonio's smile was gentle but implacable. This isn't a request, Eva. It's a necessity. He approached me slowly, as if trying not to startle a wild animal. I know you're still angry with me. I know you still dream of taking Jamie away from my world. But right now, my world, violent and controlling as you believe it to be, is the only thing standing between our son and men who wouldn't hesitate to use him to get to me. He reached for my hand, and I was too surprised by the gesture to pull away. Into my palm, he pressed something small and cold, a key. What's this? I asked, looking down at the ornate silver key nestled in my hand. Insurance, he replied. For you, the key to a safe deposit box at First Boston Trust. Inside is everything you would need if something were to happen to me. Money, identification documents, property deeds. Enough to take Jamie and disappear completely. His eyes held mine, deadly serious. If I don't return from dealing with Caruso, Marco has instructions to take you there immediately. The weight of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. Antonio was preparing for the possibility of his own death. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Because I need you to understand something, Eva, he said, his voice low and intense. Everything I do, the violence, the control, all of it, is to ensure that you and Jamie survive in a world that would happily destroy everything I love. His fingers closed around mine, pressing the key deeper into my palm. And if the price of that survival is my life, I would pay it without hesitation. I stared at him. This man who had forced me back into a life I'd tried to escape, who had taken away my freedom in the name of protection, who had built an empire on violence and fear, and who was now offering me the means to escape it all if he died keeping us safe. The contradiction was dizzying, the sincerity in his eyes unbearable. I don't want you to die, I said finally, surprised to find it was true despite everything. Antonio's smile was sad. No one ever does, cara mia, but in my world it's always a possibility. He released my hand, stepping back. Keep the key somewhere safe, somewhere only you know. I nodded, slipping it into the pocket of my jeans. When do we leave for Vermont? First light, he replied. Pack only essentials for you and Jamie. Everything else can be replaced. As he turned to leave, a strange impulse seized me. Antonio, I called after him. He paused at the door, looking back with a raised eyebrow. Be careful, I said, the words feeling inadequate for the complexity of emotions behind them. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a shadow of the connection we'd once shared. Always, cara mia, he said softly. For you and Jamie. Always. As the door closed behind him, I sank onto the edge of the bed, the key a heavy presence in my pocket. In offering me this escape route, this protection beyond his own life, Antonio had given me something unexpected. A choice. Not now, not while he lived, but someday, if the worst happened, Jamie and I would have options beyond the Castellanos Empire. It wasn't freedom. Not really. But it was the first time since my failed escape attempt that I felt something other than helpless rage or resigned fear. And that, small as it was, felt like a lifeline in a storm I couldn't control. That night, as I lay in the guest room adjacent to Jamie's nursery, I found myself wondering about the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who existed somewhere beneath the crime boss, the possessive lover, the ruthless protector, the man who had just shown me, in his own twisted way, that he valued our safety above his control. Was that love, or just another form of possession? And in the end, did the difference even matter when the result was the same? Jamie and I, bound to Antonio and his world for as long as he drew breath? I didn't have answers, only questions, fears, and a silver key that represented both imprisonment and potential freedom. And tomorrow, we would go to Vermont, deeper into Antonio's world, further from escape, further from everyone except the man who claimed us as his own. The Vermont house wasn't what I expected. Instead of another ostentatious mansion, it was a sprawling lakeside cabin built of massive timber and stone, nestled against the edge of a dense forest, with mountains rising in the distance. Beautiful, remote, and, as Antonio had promised, defensible, with only one road in and natural barriers on all other sides. We arrived as the sun was setting, casting the lake in hues of gold and amber that took my breath away despite everything. Jamie, exhausted from the journey, had fallen asleep in his car seat, his tiny features peaceful in the fading light. "It's been in my family for 3 generations," Antonio said quietly as Marco unloaded our bags. "My grandfather built it as a hunting lodge, far from prying eyes. My father brought me here when I was a boy." I glanced at him, surprised by the hint of nostalgia in his voice. Antonio rarely spoke of his childhood, of the time before he took over the family business. "It's the only place I've ever felt truly at peace," he continued, his gaze fixed on the mountains. "The only place where I could just be." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. For a moment, I glimpsed the weight he carried. The empire, the enemies, the constant vigilance, the man beneath the monster. "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. Antonio's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way I hadn't seen in months. "I wanted Jamie to know this place," he said, "to have memories here, like I do." He glanced at our sleeping son, happier ones perhaps. Before I could respond to this unexpected window into his thoughts, Marco approached, his expression serious. "The perimeter is secure, sir. The men are in position." Antonio nodded, the moment of openness already fading, replaced by the calculating crime boss. "Good. Maintain regular patrols. No one approaches without my direct authorization." "Yes, sir." Marco disappeared around the side of the house, leaving us alone with our sleeping child. "Let's get him inside," Antonio said, already moving to lift Jamie gently from his car seat. "It's getting cold." The interior of the cabin was as impressive as its setting. Vaulted ceilings, massive stone fireplace, walls of windows framing the lake and mountains. But unlike the Boston mansion, it felt lived in, almost cozy despite its size. There were books on the shelves that looked read rather than chosen for their binding. Photographs I'd never seen before, a worn leather armchair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. "The nursery is this way," Antonio said, leading me down a hallway. I had it prepared for him. The nursery was perfect, a smaller version of Jamie's room at home, with the same crib, the same soft colors, but with the addition of a wall of windows overlooking the lake. Antonio laid Jamie down with practiced gentleness, tucking the blanket around him and brushing a kiss against his forehead. "He'll sleep through the night after that drive," he murmured. "You should rest too. Your room is next door." "My room?" I asked, the implication clear. Antonio's gaze was steady, undemanding. "I thought you might prefer your own space, given the circumstances." He gestured down the hall. "The master suite is at the end if you change your mind." The consideration surprised me. Another glimpse of the man I'd once believed him to be. A man capable of respecting boundaries, of seeing me as more than a possession. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded, then turned to leave. "I have calls to make. Security matters to arrange. Don't wait up." As he disappeared down the hallway, I found myself staring after him, confused by the contradictions he presented. The ruthless crime boss who had brought me back by force, the possessive lover who insisted Jamie and I were his, and now this. The man who gave me space, who showed consideration for my comfort, even as he kept me locked in another gilded cage. The next few days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Antonio spent most of his time on the phone, or huddled with Marco, speaking in hushed Italian that I couldn't quite follow. The tension in his shoulders, in the tight line of his mouth, told me whatever was happening with Caruso was serious, more serious perhaps than he was letting on. Jamie thrived in the mountain air, delighting in the new sights and sounds of the forest, the lake. I found unexpected peace in the daily routine we established. Morning walks along the lake shore under the watchful eyes of Antonio's men, afternoons reading on the deck while Jamie napped, evenings by the fire. Antonio joined us when he could, slipping seamlessly into the role of devoted father. He taught Jamie to splash in the shallow water at the lake's edge, built elaborate block towers for him to knock down, read to him from the same books his own father had once read to him. In those moments, it was almost possible to forget the reason we were here. The danger, the violence that shadowed our lives, almost possible to imagine this as the normal family life I'd dreamed of. But then a call would come, and Antonio's expression would shudder. The warmth in his eyes replaced by cold calculation. He would disappear into his study, and I would be reminded that this peaceful interlude was built on a foundation of blood and fear. On our 5th night at the cabin, I was awakened by raised voices. I slipped from bed, checking first on Jamie, still sleeping peacefully, before following the sound to Antonio's study. The door was ajar, and through the crack, I could see Antonio pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of controlled rage. "Unacceptable," he was saying, his accent thicker with emotion. "I don't care what it costs. Find him. Find him now." He paused, listening. "No, this ends tonight. Before he can—" He broke off, noticing me in the doorway. "I'll call back," he said into the phone, ending the call. "Ava, you should be sleeping." "What's happening?" I asked, hugging my arms around myself in the cool night air. "Is it Caruso?" Antonio hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell me. Finally, he sighed, gesturing for me to enter. "Close the door." I did, then took the seat he offered across from his desk. Antonio remained standing, pouring himself a measure of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "Caruso made his move tonight," he said, after taking a long swallow. "He hit one of my distribution centers in South Boston. 3 of my men are dead." The casual way he delivered this news, as if discussing a minor business setback rather than the loss of human lives, made my stomach turn. "I'm sorry," I said, not sure what else to offer. Antonio's smile was bitter. "Are you? These are the men you consider monsters, after all. The world of violence you tried to escape." "They were still people," I said quietly. "With families, maybe. Lives that mattered to someone." He studied me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. "Yes," he said finally. "They were. Good men, loyal to me. Men who deserved better than to die in a warehouse over territory." There was genuine grief in his voice, surprising me. Antonio rarely showed emotion over business matters. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now?" Antonio set down his glass with careful precision. "Now I respond, decisively, before Caruso can strike again, perhaps at a target closer to home." The implication was clear, and fear crawled up my spine. "You think he would come here? Come after us?" "I think he's already tried," Antonio said grimly. "There was an attempt to breach the perimeter yesterday. Marco handled it quietly to avoid alarming you, but—" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. "Caruso is getting desperate. Desperate men take risks." I thought of Jamie, sleeping peacefully in his crib, unaware of the danger surrounding us. "What do we do?" Antonio's expression softened at the "we," the first time I'd acknowledged our shared stake in this situation. "You and Jamie stay here, where I know you're safe," he said. "I leave in the morning to deal with Caruso personally. Once it's done, once the threat is eliminated, we can return to Boston, to normal life." "Normal life?" I repeated, the words hollow. "There's nothing normal about any of this, Antonio. Other children don't grow up with armed guards and threats against their lives. Other mothers don't have to worry about rival crime bosses kidnapping their babies." "No," he agreed, surprising me again. "They don't." He moved around the desk, kneeling before my chair so we were eye to eye. "This isn't the life I would have chosen for you, for Jamie. but it's the only life I know how to live. His hand reached for mine, his touch unexpectedly gentle. The only way I know how to protect what matters most to me. I should have pulled away, should have rejected this intimacy, this connection to a man who had taken my freedom, who had built his empire on violence and fear. But something in his eyes, a vulnerability I'd rarely glimpsed, kept me still. There are other ways to live, Antonio, I said softly. Other ways to protect your family. Not in my world, he replied, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. In my world, you show weakness. You lose everything. You hesitate. Someone takes what's yours. His eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. I can't risk that. Not with you. Not with Jamie. The sincerity in his voice was devastating, because I knew he meant every word. In his twisted way, everything Antonio did was out of love, out of a desperate need to protect what he considered his. I need to know you understand, he continued, that while I'm gone, you won't try to run again. That you'll stay here, where it's safe, where my men can protect you. I wanted to lie, to tell him what he wanted to hear, and then flee the moment he was gone. But the truth was, I had nowhere to go. No safe haven from Caruso or any of Antonio's other enemies. No resources beyond what Antonio provided, and a terrible realization dawned. In this moment, with this specific threat, Antonio's protection, violent and controlling as it was, might be Jamie's best chance at survival. I understand, I said finally. We'll stay. Relief washed over his features, and he raised my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. Thank you, he said, the words surprisingly humble coming from him, for trusting me in this, if nothing else. He rose, still holding my hand, and the atmosphere between us shifted, charged suddenly with an electricity I recognized all too well. The connection that had drawn us together from the beginning, the chemistry that had made me overlook so many warning signs. I should get back to Jamie, I said, pulling my hand away before I could do something I might regret. Antonio stepped back, respecting the boundary. Of course. Try to rest, Ava. Tomorrow will be challenging for all of us. I nodded and turned to leave, pausing at the door. Antonio? He looked up from his desk, where he'd already returned to his papers. Yes? Be careful, I said, echoing my words from days before. For Jamie's sake. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Only for Jamie's? I didn't answer, couldn't answer. The conflict within me too raw, too confusing. Instead, I slipped out, closing the door behind me, my heart racing with emotions I didn't want to name. Antonio left before dawn, taking Marco and most of his men with him, leaving only 2 guards at the cabin, one at the front entrance, one patrolling the perimeter. The tension of his departure hung in the air like a storm about to break. I'll be back tonight, he told me as he prepared to leave, his voice pitched low to avoid waking Jamie. By morning at the latest, if you haven't heard from me by then. He pressed something into my hand, a satellite phone. Call this number. Only this number. They'll get you out, take you to the safe deposit box. The key he'd given me felt suddenly heavy in the pocket of my robe. It won't come to that, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Antonio's smile was grim. Pray it doesn't, cara mia. He hesitated, then leaned in, pressing a kiss to my forehead, chaste, but lingering. Take care of our son. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cabin with Jamie, 2 guards, and the gnawing fear that I might never see him again. And the even more terrifying realization that the prospect hurt more than I wanted to admit.